There is no early Christianity apart from the claim that Jesus is God, and he's demonstrated by raising from the grave. So they're willing to suffer and die because they believe Jesus had risen from the grave and appeared to them.
Okay, so I just want to comment really quickly here because McDowell is saying that Jesus' disciples were willing to be persecuted and die for their belief in Jesus' resurrection. Well, I want to ask the question, where in the entire New Testament, the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, Paul's letters, the book of Revelation, etc. Where in the entire New Testament does it say anything about anybody dying for any kind of belief in the resurrection? Nowhere in the entire New Testament does it say Peter was crucified upside down. Nowhere does it say for his belief in the resurrection. Nowhere does it say, Thomas went to India and was speared for believing in the resurrection. Nowhere does it say that. So where is this guy getting that information from? That Jesus' disciples died for their belief in the resurrection. Where is he getting that from? He's getting that from these apocryphal or these Gnostic tales like Acts of Peter, etc., which came 200 years after the New Testament was written. So why are you going to a document that was written 200 years after Jesus that has no sources, no reliable sources connecting it to, Peter, etc.? Why are you going to these late and unreliable sources? You see what I'm saying? So no credible sources record any of the disciples dying for any specific claim or belief. They say neither why they were killed, what they were dying for, and whether recanting would have been enough to save them. So, like, all the evidence that we have is that the original disciples of Jesus preached for decades, basically unprosecuted. They were basically unprosecuted in the heart of Jerusalem. So the disciples were preaching in Jerusalem, and nobody bothered them. Nobody was prosecuting them. No one was pursuing them, etc., for preaching their version of Christianity. If the disciples were killed for any reason, it was unexpected. So they weren't expecting to be killed because of their preaching of their version of Christianity. All of the disciples' martyrdom and all of the disciples, all these stories of Peter getting crucified upside down and Thomas, dying in India, etc., are not attested in credible sources, much less described in any credible sources. So, these, stories like the Acts of Peter, the Acts of Thomas, only appear in very late, very ridiculous, unsourced propaganda. So these are garbage as far as historical sources go. Because if you read Acts of Peter, if you read, I don't know, Acts of Thomas, and all these other books that these Christian apologists say the disciples died for their belief, these are wilder than the Gospels, and there's no sort. They have no sources for them. You see what I'm saying? So, there's no evidence that there's no direct evidence that Peter was crucified upside down and all that stuff. Like these come from like the year, like this comes from the year 200. So this is 200 years after Jesus. And not only that's not even the worst part. The worst part is it was written by an unknown author. Like Acts of Peter was written by an unknown author, and we don't know what sources he was using to say that Peter was crucified upside down, and or like like Thomas, Thomas was supposedly martyred in India. Where's the sources for that, and are the sources credible? So basically, we have nothing in the New Testament that talks about Jesus' disciples dying for their resurrection, etc. So these sources are very late. They're very ridiculous, and they have no sources. They're basically garbage. They have absolutely no basis. We have absolutely no reason or basis to believe in what they're saying. So so like, so when these Christians keep saying that the disciples died for their belief in the resurrection, were persecuted and died for their belief in Jesus' resurrection. Ask them, where are they getting that information from, and is that information, are those sources even reliable? You see what I'm saying? So like we don't have any, like the only martyrdom we have is Stephen, right? Stephen in Acts chapter 7 verse 54 to 60, but Stephen was not recorded anywhere else being the original disciples, and he is and the reason why Stephen was martyred had nothing to do with the resurrection. Nothing had nothing to do with his beliefs in Jesus' resurrection. The reason why Stephen was martyred was because he was causing problems. He was causing problems in the Jerusalem area. You see, so for example, Stephen is being set up by a mob. He has a vision of Jesus sitting next to God in the sky, but this is clearly not a physical appearance. Moreover, Stephen gives a speech professing the belief in which why he's killed is willing to die. Yet he does not mention the appearance of Jesus after the crucifixion, nor the empty tomb or anything like that. He merely professes that Jesus was the Messiah, fulfilling Jewish anticipation, and that Jesus was unjustly crucified. Indeed, he does not even claim that Jesus was God or the Son of God. Stephen seems to be treating Jesus like all the other prophets who were set to death and were stoned or crucified, and whose deaths were regarded to rebuke upon the wickedness of the Jewish authorities. So basically, Stephen. The reason why Stephen was, martyred or stoned, is because of his belief in because of his belief in Jesus and the salvation that Jesus brings, not because of Jesus' resurrection. So even if we were to go to Acts chapter 7 and say, well, Stephen is a martyr, well, it's not talking about the reason why he was martyred was because of his belief in Jesus, not because of Jesus' resurrection. So, the issue here is that we have no original, we have no reliable historical records. We have no accounts from any of the disciples or anybody who knew them about their travels and their martyrdoms and their deaths. We have no reliable records talking about this. You see, so we don't know how James died. We don't know how Peter died. We don't know how Thomas died. We don't know how Bartholomew was killed, how he died, etc., etc. So the conclusion we can draw here is that all these sources are very late, very ridiculous, and they have no sources. They have no credible sources. So these are garbage as far as historical sources go. So sorry, David Wood and McDowell. We have no credible sources that record any of the disciples dying for any specific claim or belief. So this claim that Jesus' disciples died for preaching Jesus' death and resurrection is false, because these don't come from the New Testament. These stories don't come from the New Testament. They come from, sources that are at least 200 years later than the New Testament and are much more unreliable and unhistorical than the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John themselves. So these are garbage these are unreliable garbage as far as historical sources go. So there's no credible sources that document Jesus' disciples dying for any kind of specific claim or belief. So this claim is false that the Christian apologists keep propagating all over. Stay tuned. More videos coming up ahead.